the people of the BSA and the people of their ilk, this country wouldn't have existed. There's no memorial to these people who worked at the BSA. All that stands now is a wreck. That's a disgrace.
The origins of BSA go back really quite a long time. Birmingham had been a town that had achieved some kind of preeminence in the metal bashing trades in late medieval times. And that tradition fed into the development of a gun-making industry.
The company originally was formed by a number of gunsmiths who worked in and around Birmingham. At that time, gunsmiths usually made a particular part, i.e. there'd be a company making barrels, another company making the actions, another company making stocks, and somebody putting them together.
One of the pressures upon the industry was the development of mechanisation. The Enfield factory in London was one of the prime instigators of mass production techniques and mechanisation in Britain. The big pressure point seems to have arisen at the time of the Crimean War. Pressure upon the industry was so great that it was very, very difficult for the small arms manufacturers, the individual workshops, to meet the demand that was placed upon them.
So these group of gunsmiths got together and formed an association whereby they were to introduce mass production methods. And they established themselves on this site in Small Heath. They did fall into hard times in between wars, etc., and then started to diversify into other products. One of which initially started was the cycle.
So they made bicycle components, and because of the high standard of skill in gun making, they passed this on to the cycle trade, which made them the Rolls Royce of the world.
Similarly, at a later date, there was the production of motorcycles as the BSA began to mechanise in different directions. And then the cyclical demands for war put pressure upon the company at particular times, whether we're talking about colonial wars or the Boer War or the First World War.
War. Precisely at dawn on September 1st, without warning, the German Wehrmacht rolled over the Polish border.
BSA during the war were the main munition people in this country, and they'd been warned about it, the government had been warned about it when Sir James Lee in 1936 went to Germany and saw the actual Germans producing and saying that the bullets they were preparing were for the Englanders.
Hitler had his equipment. He had his army. Now to unveil the German might and terrorize his victims into submission.
He said it's not enough, it's going to be a war, and on his own bat, he multiplied the figures that the government wanted by his figures. And it's because of that that, in fact, when the Battle of Britain started, BSA were able to produce enough Browning guns for the new Spitfires. So he's one of those people, without his foresight, we might have lost the war.
Of course, during the war years, on this site, they manufactured a huge number of armaments of all sorts. The Browning machine guns, which were fitted into Spitfires and other fighting aircraft, Bofors guns, Sten guns by the million, rocket launchers, huge amounts of ammunitions and fuses for shells of all sorts. So as far as the war effort was concerned, they produced many armaments of all descriptions.
Obviously the BSA was probably the biggest manufacturer of guns during the war, but not only guns, they made bikes, military vehicles, everything from barbed wire upwards really, so anything to actually do with the war effort, the BSA made it.
This is a folding bicycle made by BSA for parachute troopers in the Second World War, hence commonly referred to as a parabike. It folds in the middle by undoing these two butterfly nuts, pushing the pedals through, and folds like that. And the parachutist would exit the plane with this hanging on a rope. When he hit the ground, ideally the bike would hit first, he'd unfold it and pedal away on it.
Oh, I can give you all the figures there. I've got all the figures there of how many Browning guns, how many anti-tanks, how many Sten guns, how many Enfield rifles were made. I've got all those figures. Oh, it's unbelievable. The hundreds of thousands
the
or
Oerlikon
millions.
as well, wasn't it? The Oerlikon gun.
The Oerlikon gun, yes. Oh, yes.
That was a Swiss patent, I think.
It's quite amazing. You know, the figures are there, but their contribution to the sport, to the war in the way of supplying munitions for the country goes, well, it has to be recognised because they were the most formidable company in the country. ICI and people like that, but BSA really took it on board and they developed all these subsidiary firms, these dispersal units or whatever they call them, and they were producing so much for the war. Unbelievable.
So, you know, as a company, they were a great asset to the country during the war.
In June 1940, when the British and French armies were evacuated from Dunkirk, the BSA went on a 24-hour-a-day shift system.
A normal working week during the war would probably be about 49 hours, but the man that I learnt my trade through, a man named Jimmy Heath, he actually got 103 actual hours of work in a week, but we were all doing the same thing, you just had to work.
Many people worked at the BSA, including many women. The women were rather wonderful in the Second World War. They had families to look after, and yet they volunteered to work days, nights, any time you like.
When I got to 21, they called me up again and I had to go in the factory. So I went to the BSA and I was working from 7 o'clock in the morning till 7 o'clock at night. I was put on 8 milling machines and I was doing trigger guards. It started with a steel block in the first, and as one program went, I had to keep doing it till I got to the end. It was real hard work.
Did you go to any dances in the lunch break?
Oh yes, I used to dance in there at dinner time. Well, you had to keep your morale going, you know. And then at night they used to have perhaps a variety show or something like that. Or if any of the workers had got any talent, they'd get up on the stage and sing and play the piano or anything like that, you know. As I say, we made our own fun. We got on... actually, I say we had made our own happiness, because we had to, because otherwise you could get really down, because that's all you did was work.
On November the 19th, just after 9 o'clock, there was a massive raid on Birmingham.
The sirens went very early, and when the bombers was coming, they'd all got a distinctive drone with them, a distinctive buzz, boom, 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 different to any other plane. And we heard it many times because they flew over Birmingham. You see, and you could see the markings on the wings in our garden. And of course, you realise afterwards that the canal ran only about a quarter of a mile from where our house was, and they could follow the canal to the BSA, which run by the side of the BSA.
Obviously, you know, due to the BSA making so many ammunitions, and it was quite an influential place during the war, it was the place to bomb.
They sort of seemed to go past it at one period, And then they must have gone round in a circle, and they come back and started coming in low.
And one aircraft delivered 2 bombs straight into the BSA, and it hit one of the modern factory blocks.
They was told not to go and shelter in the basement, but they got a brick-built shelters over the other side of the canal in the recreation. So, but a lot of people, it was too far to run. They got to run across the canal, you know, and they was exposed. They used to go down in the basement. And others then just carry on working when the bombing was on, if they could, because it was all blacked out, the lights, the place. And you see what happened when they eat I think it was F block, and they eat the corner of the building. All the heavy machine, the auto section, went straight through the floors, down into the basement.
Night raids over Britain have lately increased. Birmingham has been one of the enemy's targets. Damage was done and lives lost. The same is true of other places in the Midlands and also in the eastern counties.
2 mile ride to work every day on the bike. On that particular morning, meant that I was climbing over bomb craters or over rubble or houses burning. The whole 2 miles of work was pretty chaotic, but the chaos was nothing to what was greeting me when I arrived at BSA on that particular morning.
I went in on my bicycle, and I was allowed in because being an electrician, you're on maintenance as well. And I actually had to go into the rubble with the rescue people, and we were moving rubble, and if we saw an arm or a leg, we'd call the Red Cross people, and they pushed us on one side and they reclaimed the body.
The Home Guard done a hell of a lot as far as firefighting was concerned. I mean, they played a big part at the BSA, because the BSA had quite a big unit. A lot of the factories had their own Home Guard unit and fire service unit.
But on that same night, 2 of the electricians who I work with, very close friends of mine, the one went into the wreckage with an acetylene cutter, was cutting girders, and managed to save the lives of a number of people. And he got the George Medal, a fellow named Alf Stevens, and Alf Goodwin helped him, and he had the British Empire Medal. And it was amazing, the whole thing. Amazing how much work was put in by people. And, well, you know, the fire people and everybody. Some of the memorabilia that I've got about the BSA, I've read it through again this morning. And there was one piece I read through, I actually cried because the man himself got bombed in the BSA, and it looked as if he wouldn't recover, wouldn't get out. And this Alf Stevens got him out. And the guy, all he was thinking was getting home, but they wanted to take him to the hospital. He said, my wife will get me right, never mind. They got him home, and his home had been bombed. And he goes in to try and find his wife, and his wife's not there, but she was next door, fortunately, and they heard him. But, oh. Well, it's a very human story, you see.
Well, I think it was the biggest loss of life at any factory, the BSA.
53 people lost their lives there, many of them women.
89 workers were injured and 53 were killed. It took 6 weeks to get the last body out of the factory. So it was quite a disaster as an air raid disaster and a disaster for Birmingham.
Late 40s when I started school, it was all swept under the carpet. Nobody wanted to talk about it. It's been a horrible period. I think that people wanted to forget in some ways, and I think that's probably not actually done the city many favours, because I think the city's lost a great deal.
The youngsters that we get round here are not aware of what the Blitz was, what the BSA was, what the area is now, what it was used for. It's just open space that means nothing to them.
Well, I don't think it's remembered really, it's forgotten. It's remembered by enthusiasts who have motorcycles.
If they think of the BSA, the only thing they're going to think about the BSA is bikes and motorcycles. They're not going to think about the magnificent effort that they made during the war, as I stated previously.
Well, I think it's been completely forgotten in terms of its war effort, yes.
According to the historians, Birmingham was the second heaviest bombed city outside of London. And for some reason, probably during the war because of censorship, the people in the rest of the country were unaware of the bashing that Birmingham got during the Second World War.
Not many people are aware that at the outbreak of war, there was a D-notice placed on most of the major cities who dealt with munitions and all to do with armaments during the war, which obviously Birmingham came under this umbrella because of the number of factories here involved in war work. The D-notice was a 30-year ban, with the result that when Birmingham was bombed in the early days, it was never ever mentioned. It was always referred to as a Midlands town.
The papers were censored because the Germans would have their informants, and we were supposed to be keeping it from them, but they knew what they were doing and they knew what they were bombing. But afraid the rest of the country didn't.
Kampfflugzeuge vom Typ Ju-88 werden zum Start klargemacht. Birmingham, eines der Industriezentren Mittelenglands, soll mit starken Kräften angegriffen werden.
After the war, when it all came out, there was still this ban on Birmingham, and so with the result we are not in the history books, and it's so unfair when we are not mentioned, and you get people in Birmingham, even they say, oh, I know Coventry was bombed, was Birmingham bombed?
A thousand-fold revenge was Coventry. On the night of November 14th, 1 million pounds of bombs were dropped on the city.
Well, I always get a little bit annoyed about that because when they start talking about the Blitz, they always talk about Coventry. It's always Coventry. All right, it had a lot of devastation there, and a lot of it was all done in one night. But for many years after the war, you walked around Birmingham and there was a hell of a lot of places missing.
There were nearly 1,000 casualties, nearly 1,000 more people killed in Birmingham than Coventry. And we had twice the tonnage of high explosive bombs dropped on this city. And it's not recorded, or there's no publicity about it.
The cathedral in Coventry was bombed and stuff like that, so it may be remembered more for the bombing of the cathedral and the surrounding area as opposed to them trying to bomb the BSA here. You know, perhaps it's almost, you know, a gun factory in the middle of Birmingham. Perhaps they're almost expected to have it bombed type of thing during the war. That's the thing that, you know, Hitler and his planes and tried to do. As opposed to bombing innocent people or the cathedral. So.
My name is John Price. I run the Made in Birmingham website. I run the campaign for the BSA Memorial, trying to get a memorial for the workers that were killed in 1940. It is supported by the local MP, Roger Godsiff.
Well, I understand that there is a campaign for a permanent memorial to BSA, and it's one that I support. I think it, as I say, it's a very prominent part of the area, of the Small Heath area. It's a very important part of the history of Birmingham, and the people who were killed by the bombing of the factory were making just as much of a contribution to the war effort as the troops on the front line. So I think it's right and proper that the people who were killed should have a memorial, and I support the campaign to have one.
But the boundaries have changed in 2004, and now John Hemming is a local MP, and he doesn't seem to support it in the same way as Roger Godsiff does.
Quite a few people died during the bombings of Birmingham, just over 2,000, for which we've recently created a memorial in the centre of Birmingham. There was quite a lot of effort that went into commemorating everybody who died in Birmingham as a result of the bombings, which includes the 53 people from BSA. If it wasn't for the fact that we'd already just had a memorial to the people who died from the bombings in the city, it'd be a much stronger case because there wouldn't be a memorial at all. But there is one. And you therefore ask yourself a question of, do we need another memorial when we've got a memorial? And if we have that, do we then, for equity reasons, we should do it for everybody else?
It depends on what type of memorial you want and how significant you want the memorial to be. And I suggest the number of people killed and the way they were killed. Remember, these people were making weapons for war. Some of them were too young to go to war, and some of them were too old to be at war. So I think the significance of the event should be celebrated by the significance of the memorial.
The fact of the matter is, as John Hemmings has pointed out previously to you, the people who were killed in the bombing of Birmingham have been, are going to be rightly remembered by the memorial in the city centre. But the whole point about the BSA is the BSA was a huge part of Birmingham's industrial history and its heritage. And it was a factory that was working on war production when these people were killed, and it played a very important role in the war effort.
When you remember that Birmingham erected a memorial to the Spitfire at Castle Vale, I mean, the Spitfire was only used in a very small campaign during the Second World War, and the Spitfire would have been an ornament without BSA guns on it. So, I mean, BSA contributed to both wars. And in fact, it produced most of the weapons that were actually made in both world wars. So again, that's a very significant fact. And if you can put a memorial up to Spitfire workers and the Spitfire at Castle Bromwich, surely you can put one up to BSA.
They, of course, did do a memorial relating to all the people that died during the bombing of Birmingham as a whole. But I think that as the BSA had such a huge impact on the production of armaments during the war. It was a hugely important site, and people literally died serving the country, producing these items, and as such, they should be commemorated. And certainly as close as possible to the site where it happened.
We carry on with the appeal, and we hope by the year 2010, which will be the 70th anniversary of the air raid, that we will in fact have some form of a memorial on site.
What you do, take the cover off, and put your barrels in, and the drills come all the way through. The gentleman is building the magazines for the Super 10, the Ultra Multi-Shock. The BSA meet you today.